Fourth obstacle, the quest for sanctity. A saint, according to the canon of the Catholic Church in its great days, is a man who practices to a heroic extent one of the three theological virtues. The modern mind prefers to award halos to less compromising forms of sanctity. For in any human life, the total realization of either faith or hope or love would lead to such excesses as worldly wisdom could not approve, any more than it approved of the absolute mysticism of St. Francis of Assisi. Sanctity, according to our modern, more moderate criterion, is the prudent exercise of mediocre virtues, such as will keep us unspotted by the stain of sins recognized as such. What a pitiful creature such a saint would be, and how poor in knowledge of life. But what enlargement of consciousness can one attain if one's experience of good and evil is limited to the observance or violation of imposed commandments? To judge in this way is to prejudge. It is prejudice, not knowledge. The most helpful way of acquiring consciousness is through the sense of one's own responsibility, the shock of a temptation overcome, and, if one fails, the precious burning sensation of remorse and shame. This does not refer to the remorse that comes of being condemned by conventional or traditional moral standards, nor to obsession with the memory of a fault, which transforms a man into a guilty wretch through brooding over it. The remorse that liberates arises from a flash of light, illuminating the deeper motives of the fault. For this recognition to be wholly true, one must be pitilessly neutral, and put aside any excuses suggested by the feeling or thinking of the personality. To redeem an error is to cancel out its evil effects, whether on others, which means making all possible reparation, or on oneself. The evil effect upon oneself is the violation of conscience, for this is a partial obliteration of consciousness. It can only be redeemed by a pitiless recognition of the impulses which led to the offense, until the shame of it becomes so painful as to render any repetition of the act intolerable. That is the efficacious type of remorse, and destroys the roots of evil, provided that it continues to be felt until the result is totally achieved. And it is the result which counts, not the time taken to achieve it. Shame and remorse, when truly felt, have the sacrificial value of a purifying fire. This type of remorse is of inestimable value as an initiation, and does not leave behind it any timid sadness or depressing regret, but a renewed ardor for the struggle. For the part of us that it touches is not our human vanity, but our higher consciousness, and any shock which can awaken that is, for the wise man, a new contribution to fuller control and fuller life. Candidates for irreproachable virtue know nothing of this treasure, for their program is quite the contrary. They prefer to remain blind to their secret temptations, and hide their responsibility behind the authorities and their regulations. Thus, for the burning touch of experience, they substitute security in obedience and self-complacency for learning from one's mistakes. Their obedience is a sleeping draught that puts their consciousness to sleep. For consciousness is only awake if every step on the path is receiving free, unconstrained, and deliberate examination. He who rejects the experience which his soul requires, for fear of tarnishing his virtue, is in love with his earthly form and not with his eternal life. Happy is he who has never, for fear of a burn or fall, extinguished this wonderful spark in himself or another. For that is the unpardonable sin. For as the Gospel says, he that hath not put his talent to use shall be deprived of all that he hath. The wise man tends the divine fire in himself until it overcomes all lesser fires, but a petty spirit prefers to conceal it behind false modesty and sacrifice it to the opinion of the world. Poor earth-bound man, so afraid of losing what he does not possess. For the integrity of his, quote, purity is simply the cloak with which his arbitrary judgment covers up his stifled instincts. Poor man, condemned to drag out endlessly a useless pilgrimage whose lessons he refuses to learn. He can drag on like that until the end of the world without finding the repose of accomplishment, because he has sacrificed his God, which is his fire of salvation, to the idol of his ego. His fear of sin keeps him in the rut of mediocrity, where his longings are hypocritically disguised. Fear atrophies his joy of life, and the reproaches of conscience are buried beneath a mountain of excuses. Since he is justified in his own eyes, he has no further redemption to look forward to, and no hope of attaining the kingdom of heaven, because he has created his own paradise on earth in the form of self-complacency. If you stifle your passions, how can you recognize the force that is in you to be transmuted? Idealistic dreams, the desires of the mind, are illusions without any substance, for there is nothing to be transmuted. Only physical matter and earthly fire can be transmuted into heavenly fire. Mental impressions and projections are mere reflections. They can set in action the intellectual will, but not the vital fire that we have to awaken. This fire reacts to instinctive forces only, be they in their animal or their spiritual aspect. The mutual reaction between these two poles, if controlled and directed consciously and wisely, will cause vitality and vital consciousness to awake and grow. The petty persons of this world have called one of these poles virtue and the other vice, but the man who, in order to satisfy them, obeys the one and denies the other, will find himself suspended in the void. For as in magnetism, to abolish one pole is to abolish both. It is the negation of life, the refusal of redemption for fear of committing a fault. Any action by which you can transcend yourself and escape from your prison must of necessity be in some way excessive, for otherwise it would have no power and would remain within the limits of the normal. But how will you ever dare to do anything brave if prudence keeps you locked up in the preoccupation of trying to avoid making a single mistake? It was not the unassailable Pharisee who becomes a friend of Jesus, but the sinner Zacchaeus, who recognized his unworthiness, and the prostitute from Magdala, whose love burned out the roots of her disgrace. All this is only a strict and truthful observation of our own instinctive nature. It cannot be construed either as an encouragement to depravity or as a criticism directed at Christian, quote, purity. The scrupulous Brahmin is meeting the same obstacle on the royal road, and so is the hermit who thinks of nothing but his own perfection. Equally, he who seeks here a, quote, mechanical method for becoming a superman without a scratch on his virtuous door is narrow, and so low that to pass it one must be able, as the ancient Egyptians said, to, quote, smell the earth. It is open only to those who have become simple, who have no pretension to be free of stain, but who open their hearts eagerly to the light, and in it forget their personal worries, fears, and prejudices.